Welcome back. South Africa is going into the World Economic Forum in Davos with more bad news. A report by the WEF says poor health and education are among the issues that are currently hindering social mobility in the country. We are ranked 77th out of 82 countries on the forum's Social Mobility Index. World leaders are meeting in Switzerland for their annual World Economic Forum get-together this week. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni leading the South African delegation. President Cyril Ramaphosa has decided not to attend this year, choosing instead to attend to pressing issues here at home. To discuss the World Economic Forum further and South Africa's prospects, I'm joined tonight by economic analyst Maudi Linswane. Also in studio with us is Rand Merchant Bank's Africa analyst Neville Mandimika. Gentlemen, a very good evening to you. Thank you both for coming in. And I want to start with you, Maudi, and talk about what South Africa's unique selling point is going into WEF this year.
Yeah, look, I think, like everybody else is saying, it's going to be a very, very difficult one, I think, for Team South Africa. I think 18 months ago, when Ramaphosa came into power, there was probably something that, one could say it's a very positive story to sell, to say we have a new dawn, and that new dawn is going to bring in a whole lot of reforms and the changes that are necessary for this economy to turn around. I mean, fast forward 18 months later, or just over around 2 years later, some of those reforms haven't happened, and there's this resistance, to those reforms that is happening in the country. That when you look at Team South Africa, I don't think they're taking a united voice into Davos. And that's why you hear from the finance minister frustrated on Twitter, tweeting about all kinds of things. Clearly a frustration that is coming from within. So I think it's going to be a very tough one. However, we need to continue to speak the message, the fact that we are slowly reforming those, trying to implement those reforms. And hopefully we can basically speedy that process and ensure that we become a lot more investor-friendly.
And I want to take the point that Maudi is making, Neville, and talk about the finance minister's tweets last week about the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. We know it's ANC policy to go ahead with the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. He disagrees very publicly as finance minister. So what implications then for a country that is so desperate to attract investors, especially when we've had the likes of the ratings agencies flagging policy uncertainty as a big worry where South Africa is concerned?
Look, it's obviously a concern. I mean, as Maudi talked about here, in terms of the mixed messages that are going out there, it certainly doesn't help the case. But I think it's always important for us to realize that even though we're talking about, the issues that South Africa is facing and everything else that we need to do with it, we're still competing for the same dollar, because you're going there to Davos to sell your story, but there are other countries that are there competing for the same dollar that we want. And unfortunately for South Africa, there are a whole lot of economies out there that seem to be doing the right thing, your Ethiopias, your Angolas, etc., doing the right thing in order to be attractive to capital. And that's what this week is all going to be about. Who can sell their story the best?
Let me ask you this then, Maudi. I mean, we see government send this huge delegation to Davos every year, and people are still not convinced that it's worth all the noise. How do we measure the benefits from a gathering as big as Davos, especially given that there are so many other countries competing for what is a relatively small pie?
Yeah, look, I think you're right. There's a country that sends large delegates, from the US. But I don't think that it's even about the size of your delegates that you send. I think it's really just about the quality of the message that you send out. This is an opportunity for every single country to showcase what investment opportunities they have. And I think it's just about the message and whether or not that message, it's sound enough to convince those investors, like we're saying, that there's a number of other countries that are really vying for the same dollar. And if you're not convincing in terms of what your message is and vis-a-vis also what is transpiring on the ground, you're going to find it very, very difficult. Some, I guess, they go there to pop champagnes. And unfortunately, that's the situation, that they forget why they are there. And that's why sometimes they come back with nothing.
Neville, is Davos worth the trip?
I would say so, simply because you don't get a better networking opportunity, right? And in Davos, you're going to find the who's who in one place looking to sell your story. So I think it's not so much about, how many dollars and cents you're going to come back with straight from Davos, but rather the strength of the story that you're selling, who you're speaking with, and more importantly, whether they're actually buying into that. So we may not see the benefits tomorrow, but I think it certainly makes sense, particularly from, President Ramaphosa's perspective.
But it's tricky, though, isn't it, when you say it's more about the message, because for the many millions of South Africans who are sitting without work, national unemployment now nearing the 30% mark. Last week we had Telkom talking about retrenchments. Massmart is going to retrench. These South Africans want more than just a message. In fact, they want action and investment as soon as tomorrow. So how do you convince them that this is worth it?
Sure. I mean, the issues that we're talking about here are structural in nature, right? These are not things that you're going to solve tomorrow, because it took us quite a long period of time to get to this particular point. So yes, while we may say, messaging in Davos while you're simping on champagne is quite another issue, it takes time to attract the capital that we actually do need here.
Maudi, I want to talk to you about Eskom, because we know it's been flagged as the biggest threat to the country's economy currently. There are plans to unbundle it into three. There's a war room to sort out the load shedding issue, a new interim board chairperson, and the list goes on. When you look at government's messaging around the Eskom crisis, do you think it's good enough then to convince the internationals that should they bring money here, there will be power to keep those investments running?
A simple answer is no, because the messages have certainly been very mixed. They worry you. When you look at what probably the message from the president side, it's quite positive about what needs to be done. And also from the finance ministry, I think it's quite positive. It's very clear about what needs to be done. Eskom remains one of the biggest risks, no doubt about it. But when you look at the fact that, unfortunately, the structure of the ruling party is that you don't have an alliance with the unions, and the messages coming from the unions, it's a completely different messages about what the approach or how they want to see Eskom being resolved. Then you then wonder whether the president would be able to, of course, implement what he's planning to do. And that's the biggest worry, is the uncertainty around that's been created by all these mixed messages that is coming through. I think the Treasury has got a good plan, needs to be implemented, and once it's implemented, I think we'll see some positive outcomes. But I think the question is, will they be able to implement it? That's a big question.
So where should we be putting money next? Where should government be pouring funds into? I know there's talk about increasing social spending, more money going into social grants, healthcare, education and the sort. But what else should government be giving money to make sure that, apart from the international investment, we are able to bring ourselves up internally as South Africa?
Look, I think there are a few issues, low-hanging fruit that we can solve. Issues such as Eskom that is, being talked about now. We've got a new CEO and all of those things. And I think, again, it goes back to the issue of whether we're actually talking up the right issues. I mean, we've got Moody's that is hanging right around the corner. Are we going to be downgraded or not? I think, coming up with credible plans around that then becomes a very, very important point in terms of, is there a plan? Because we may not get the right things right in the short term, but if we've got a credible plan that we can sell to the international community, then I think South Africa might be better for it.
Will we get a downgrade, Maudi?
Look, there's a high possibility, and I think it all boils down to, we've got to act. We've run out of time, Tamegile. We've run out of time. Like it or not, these structural changes or reforms, we are going to implement it. It's either we do it willingly and have a plan, or we are going to be forced to do it. Once you are downgraded, you've got no choice. The market will force you to reform and retrench where you have to, and make sure that you actually get the structure right. Otherwise, we can plan this thing and implement it at our own will ourselves, or otherwise we'll be forced.
Maudi, Neville, thank you so much for your time. We'll have you again back on, Neville. I see you were itching to say something there, but for now we have to leave it there. My thanks to you both. That was economic analyst Maudi Lintswane, as well as Africa analyst Neville Mandimika.